All right, everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for coming out to Brushwood Center on this nice snowy day. With a reminder of spring all around us, it's the healing power of plants. I'm Catherine Gates, I'm the executive director here. And I'm so thrilled that we have both of our artists participating in this talk. And so we'll get to a little bit more about them, but just to provide some context for the Dear Earth series, we started this lecture series last summer after our Smith Nature Symposium Award, which was presented to Robert Redford and his wife, Sibylla Chagars Redford. And she has created a whole environmental art performance and paintings as a tribute to Mother Earth. And so we started this series of conversations, of talks, kind of inspired by that. Dear Earth, thinking about our relationship with the planet in a really intimate way. And I think that these pieces of artwork really embody that message so well as we think about our relationship with plants culturally, historically, medicinally. You know, we're really just so connected to the natural world and have been, you know, throughout the existence of humanity. So thank you for joining us on this journey today. We have, as you came in, you may have gotten little postcards. We also have more in the back. As a part of this series, we're asking everyone who participates to fill out a little postcard. It says, Dear Earth, and then you just complete it with your pledge to the earth, your response to today's talk. You know, we're curious to gather the input from everyone who participates in this. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Barb Kreski, who is the former director of horticultural therapy at the Chicago Botanic Garden and has so much wonderful experience in that area, along with Stephanie Bird, whose beautiful paintings are along this side of the room, and Gabriella Boros, whose woodblock images are also on the adjacent side. So it's nice that we have both pieces with us through the conversation today.
Kind of like at a wedding, when this is the bride side, this is the groom side. I feel like we had set this way.
So please join me in welcoming.
We're glad you're here, and we're glad to be here. Let me set some ground rules. It's not going to be, you know, like an inquisition. It's going to be a conversation among the three of us, but also including you. We're going to start and end with questions and answers. Since I'm starting, I'm asking the first question of you. We will have time set aside at the end for questions and answers. If there's something that really needs to be included at the moment because it pertains to the discussion very specifically, just, you know, raise your hand or blurt it out, because we'd like to have it, as I say, a conversation today. So, without further ado, let's get started with my question of all of you, which is, can you tell me either a definition or what comes to mind when you hear the word healing?
Wholesome.
Wholesome. Thank you. I didn't see it.
Repair.
Hair.
Resiliency.
Nice. Resiliency.
Soothing.
Relief. Restoration.
What wonderful words. So, the theme, of course, of the art exhibition is healing plants. While each of these artists does other types of work at times, they're very strong in this. And we'll find as we talk that plants and the healing nature of plants and healing in general are very nicely woven theme throughout. So I'm going to turn to each of you, and I would like you to talk a little bit about how that theme of healing and plants in the natural world weaves through your work. And I'm going to start here, but again, it's conversation.
So, I'm very intrigued by plants. I'm an avid gardener, and my father's an immunologist, so it kind of comes together maybe genetically and from the natural world. And the idea for healing plants is something that occurred to me when I heard a folk tale that kind of sparked in me this idea that there must be an international need for tales about healing, because that's where all healing started, was with plants in the natural world. And I embarked on this really terribly long research, because folk tales are by nature secrets as well. You're not supposed to tell people which plants are healing plants, because for fear that they might go out and try to heal themselves. And a lot of these plants are also very deadly. So it became a really difficult process to find these 8 stories that highlight healing plants. But I found 8 different nationalities, and it just started an entire new avenue for me to do my artwork.
I like that. We're going to come back to some of that, but let's hear Stephanie's version of how healing and plants come to be part of you and your work.
I think that it started for me back when I was a little girl, growing up on the lake in southern New Jersey. I am flanked by 3 sides of woods behind us, east and west. And the trees just spoke to me. They spoke to me, they encouraged me. The water had a voice for me that I wanted to record visually. So it's been an ongoing theme in my work is plants. I think that because they're kind of abstract, some people, it kind of gets obliterated, but I wanted the energy of plants, even flowers, even bouquets of flowers have healing potential and healing medicine. That's why we give them to the ill. We give them for all different occasions, Valentine's Day coming up. It's something that they do to the spirit and the heart. So when I think of healing, I think of this word that I use in my books, dis-ease, disease. And I feel as though plants put us at ease.
Oh,
So that's nice.
I love it. In my work, just up until December when I retired at the Botanic Garden, I really felt strongly that everybody that we dealt with related and responded to plants. Have you found somebody who doesn't, or do you find that that's also true?
I feel that everyone, it's a part of our lives, from aspirin, willow, to, like I said, flowers, being a part of your home. I haven't met anyone who plants were foreign to, although people want to know how to utilize them more.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And I wanted to come back to something you said, Gabriella, about generations, because folk tales also are transmitted generationally. So how interesting that you brought that back. Do you find, as you look back on your generations, or whatever forms your greater past, do you see threads that travel through, bring you to where you are today?
I wouldn't say necessarily with the plants.
Okay, that's fair enough.
I think that that's a very, we're Jewish, and my parents are both Holocaust survivors, so they were raised in cities, they were urban people, for generations were urban people.
Mm-hmm.
We were as separate from the plant world as could possibly be. But my mother was actually, when as an orphan brought to Israel, she was went to an agricultural school as an orphan there, and I think that really gave her a love of plants. And in turn, when we moved to a house with a garden, that was where my love of plants started. And her indoors of her house is full of plants. This is mine as well. So we have plants indoors and outdoors too.
So you relate to plants, good. And I should add, for those of you who've only seen the parts of Gabriella's work that are on display here, she does many other themes and types and other media as well, right? So check out on the website because it's rather fascinating. You also referred to your Judaism, and Stephanie is obviously an African-American woman. So another very interesting tidbit that I've learned about both of these artists is that they've got their own strong cultural identity, but they've dived deep into the cultures of other peoples. So can you explain a little bit better than I am what I'm referring to?
Yes, I know what you're referring to, but I just want to preface by saying that I am a very multicultural person. I have clearly West African, that and actually Congolese. The Pygmy people are the people of my mother, but then we have Spanish and Portuguese and Italian and English and Irish. I did a lot of the DNA work, actually before it was popular. 10 or 12 years ago, I did a lot of that work. So I've always felt citizen of the world, commonalities with many different types of people. But I wanted to actually study with people who were clan-based. Some people call it tribal. So I went to Australia and lived with the Aboriginal people. And I wanted to learn about how their paintings are so much speaking about healing and plants from an aerial perspective, and how ritual and ceremony plays a large role in their work. So we spent a year there traveling through the country and meeting different people and participating in some rituals and ceremonies and learning about the painting traditions there. So,
When you say they had an aerial viewpoint,
yeah.
their art,
Their art has an aerial perspective, and now going on walkabout by airplane is common. I mean, people go to different corroborees, they're called, when people gather and dance and sing and have funerals and so forth. They go by plane if they don't walk. But back in the older times, there wasn't access to planes, and they still had that same perspective.
and how,
So,
I mean,
I
also
have
that's
no
part of
idea.
the kind of,
Mystique,
Mystique, that's a
yeah,
good
and
word
it
for
could
it.
come from being shaman and going to the netherworld, and the upper world through the use of plants. But
okay. So it could be part of their spiritual
The way of
ritual and
seeing.
practice that they get a different viewpoint.
yes, yes,
Kind
and
of
it's
breaks through the
fascinating.
human barrier.
It's fascinating. I mean, they do investigations like CSI, but they have their own Aboriginal manner of smoking out people who have perpetrated crimes in the different tribal areas that are pretty effective, pretty spooky and effective ways of working. So that's just a very fascinating culture.
Even what the taste of it's fascinating.
Yes, and they are all different too. It's not a monoculture, like I was saying, I am not either. They each from 100 miles, 150 miles, people are completely different. And they also have different ethnicities and things like that.
You did say, though, that in your own DNA research on yourself, that you have some relationship to people of that area?
Oh, no.
No, I misunderstood
I
that.
have relationship to Native American people,
Okay.
but not to Aboriginal.
I misunderstood.
No,
Okay.
but many different other places besides there. And
Yeah.
I seemed to fit in when I was there. People were like, okay, you're here. Worked out.
Yes, that was a lot of effort, so
Yeah.
I'm glad they did. Very fascinating. And I know that also that you have explored another culture as well.
Right. I was accepted to a residency last year at Grand Marais Artist Colony, which is on the north shore of Lake Superior in Minnesota. And for the residency, I did a body of work which was researching the Ojibwe people's medicine from plants that were specifically to heal women's issues like problems with pregnancy or menopause and things like that. And as part of this remarkable journey, I actually was able to meet with a woman from the nearby reservation called Grand Portage, and she came down to speak with me about plants and how plants are used in their culture. So it was really an amazing kind of trip that started with a lot of research, just really dry research, and then going to putting together the research about the plants. Then I created my own narratives, which are not in any way trying to show actual Ojibwe life, but just how would this plant be used in a regular situation, and then meeting this person as well. And the narratives are, I suspend time, so they aren't really of this particular time or of 100 years ago. And I'm not necessarily saying that these are Ojibwe people. It's just alluding to the fact that it is the plants that are being used.
And the narratives are in a couple of binders here today, correct?
Yes.
And they're fascinating, yeah. It's widely known, I mean, we all know, right, that current day pharmaceuticals are largely, if you go back far enough, plant-based. And we can look at some of these cultures that seem more primitive than ours, but finally scientists are beginning to wise up and say, oh, we better investigate some of this, because there's great potential within the plant world for healing, literal medicinal healing, as well as what is also being researched, the healing that being in a plant-rich environment reduces stress. And interestingly enough, you as an audience hit on a couple of the key words that are used in the research, which is restoration and, oh goodness, I'm gonna not.
Was it resiliency?
Resiliency, third air. Yeah, anyway, you get the idea. So those are definitely currently being studied as well, the impact on our well-being and mental health. So you wrote the narratives. You also do some writing. You have books, right?
Yes.
So tell us about that.
I've had 7 books published, the most recent one in December. I really sort of draw on African American and African throughout the whole, continent. Different types of healing, from herbs to shamanism to the aromatherapy. I'm interested in all of those things, as well as the stories that are attached to the different types of plants. I practice myself, and I also teach others how to practice through my books. So.
It fascinates me, these creative women with expressive outlets in more than one way. I mean, even in, your art media, more than one way, but, written word as well as, well, you deal with ritual as well, so actions.
Yes, and
as-
ceremonies.
Ceremonies.
Mhm. Yes.
Yeah, so when you work so this would be something I'd be curious, when you work to produce your visual art, are you putting down your experience of the moment, or is that part of, do you have in mind the audience, the viewer, the person who's going to see it, and what you are putting down will do for them?
That's a very interesting question. Part of it is self-healing, just the actions. Like I typically listen to music, very rhythmic music, like hip hop, jazz, pop, all different types of music that stirs me inside. And I use my arm to record and react with the music while I'm looking at different types of plants. So there is kind of a ritual to how the work is created, and I feel that as long as I'm really honest and true to that type of movement and ceremony, that it will have an effect on the audience, that they will come along with me into the kinds of rhythms and visions I get involved with. So.
Having seen your work in person now, I can certainly attest to, yes, rhythm, motion.
Yes,
for
motion
sure,
is really important.
it just jumps off your work. So it's interesting. So these are very sort of sensory experiences. You're talking about, you deal with aromatherapy, and then you have music going.
Yes.
You're painting.
Yeah.
So it's a lot.
The work has to be, the plants that I use need to be alive and fresh. I need to be able to smell them. I use a lot of lilies, and I use orchids, and I never paint with it from photographs or from anything artificial. I mean, man-made. It's all natural and alive and fresh, and I react with that. So
And where do you find these plants?
Sometimes I work in plein air, which means outdoors and in the garden. So about half of the work is done outside on location, and then others are done where I purchase things that are interesting to me, or I clip from outdoors and bring it inside, or I collect leaves from different places and bring them into my studio. So variety.
Variety, for sure. You must have quite a garden. You're a gardener.
My husband's the good gardener.
Oh,
I utilize.
It's perfect.
Yeah, I go into the space and paint and collect and things like that, all the way up until the end of the season. Some of the pieces that are in the room where the food and drink is laid out are from right at the end of the season, where it's getting really quite cold, and I painted from inside the window looking out into the garden.
Do you paint in this weather?
Not so much. If I do though, I did a snow series last February, so I just did it from inside, looking out, like you could do here quite easily. So.
Well, I mean, you're true and authentic too. You need the real material.
I do.
And that's harder in winter.
Yes, and I need bright light. Bright light's really important to me, so I tend to do other things in the winter, like write or just develop things that were already in the works in the fall.
Very cool, thank you. Now you do your own gardening, am I right on that?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's 1 out of 3. No.
I have riotous flower garden up front, and then I have a vegetable garden in the back, and a shade garden on the side, and then a shade garden in the way back. So I'm really into
How do
it.
you produce art if you've got all that going on?
Yeah, it's a battle. I mean, last summer I just gave in and I just did art because I just was on this, I had this series I wanted to get out and I just did it and the garden just went totally downhill,
Yeah.
so it was,
As it will.
yeah,
Yeah.
it takes a lot of work to keep up the garden.
Yeah.
So that was a bummer, but you know what? You gave up less tomatoes, but great prints.
So, when you were studying the folk tales for your folktale series, you talked about how difficult it was to find the expression, the specific expression, sort of, when I think of it almost as the prescription of how to use this in a healing way. And we had talked on the phone and I had learned that this was a difficult process, but I find it so fascinating that that's kind of a protective.
Right, because many of the plants that are used for healing are also very poisonous. And you have to know just how to use and which part of the plants you need to use. And obviously you get that out in amongst common knowledge. People may take it upon themselves to use the plants inappropriately and they can get hurt. So that's why it was really difficult to actually nail down actual plants and not magical plants, which is most folktales have a lot of interesting magical plants that heal everything. You know?
Oh, we wish.
Yeah. What actually happens is that all of the plants, all the 8 folktales have plants that are healing plants, but they wouldn't necessarily heal what was under discussion in the stories. So, for example, for this the Angelica plant is it would not heal the plague. Okay.
Well.
It is an amazing plant high in vitamin C. So it would help build immunity, but it would not be able to, the bubonic plague would not be slayed by sucking on the roots of your Angelica plant, you know. And the same with the gentian violet, which is St. Ladislav, it's like third from the left. Yeah, St. Ladislav shot an arrow up into the sky, and wherever the arrow landed would be the perfect plant to cure the plague. Not so much. Gentian violet is an antimicrobial plant. It's still used today, but certainly you would be really hard pressed to have it do more than that. So they're not perfect healing plants, but they do actually, they do help.
Was there any commonality among the cultures that you found these in? I mean, what kind of cultures did you ultimately find these folktales from?
Well, actually, there was no commonality, and that was what was so interesting, that every culture wants plants to heal, but the stories of how those plants and how those healers come together are completely different. And so, yeah, so we have, you know, Achilles back there. We have the Native American plants tribe. We have the Croatian-Hungarian story. So they're all, I mean, Venezuelan. This is Chinese, Scandinavian. That's a Hasidic folktale from Eastern Europe. And I can't see, what is that one? The African from Tanzania. So those are really different.
You've covered the globe, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's what was my intent, was just to really to find as many different cultures and show how much it's a part of all of us, is to find that healing and reaching out to other people, because each of them, of course, have this connection of one person is sick and one person is the healer.
That's okay. Like that. And in addition, the plant is an agent or a tool used in the healing process. Very nice. So those are the folk tales with plants healing, but you spoke a little bit about the Ojibwe plants and healing. was the person who told you about those plants and how they were used with women's issues, was she equally holding back some of the information, or protecting, I should say, protecting all of us by misuse of the information?
Okay, so actually that.
Am I mixing
Yeah,
up
you're
stories?
mixing
I
things up.
apologize.
No, that's fine.
Help me
So the woman that I met
Mhm.
is using plants for specifically her personal illnesses.
All right.
And so she has been doing research on traditional medicines for her personal use, and she's a remarkable woman. She donated her kidney for her father, and she has had ailments since then. She's had problems because her body just can't help clean itself out by itself. So that was different. So
Okay,
she brought me several books that were written by Native Americans and showed me, and these are books that really aren't common knowledge books. I think one was published by National Publisher, but went out of print, and she said, you know, we really don't like people to know this stuff, because a lot of our plants are also sacred, ritualistic, use sacred rituals. So this is not for the open public. So she made that very, very clear to me, and there were things that she didn't even want me to see in some of the books.
So she was protected.
So she was protected.
Uh-huh.
And in fact, she made it very clear to me that that the discussion that we were having was not something that she would have with just anybody. But because I had mentioned that my parents were Holocaust survivors, that was the reason why she was speaking with me. Because she felt that my family had survived something very similar to what her family had survived.
Okay.
It's persecuted peoples. And so, so that was that relationship. I had actually done the research about the healing plants on my own.
Gotcha.
Yeah, because, and again, it took a lot of different resources, because it is kind of difficult to find.
Yeah. Going way back to the beginning of our conversation when I talked about a thread for generations, I see that a bit in that this woman felt a relationship to you given just one generation removed, but a generational trauma that informs your life. It has to inform your life, and she recognized that. I think survivors often see that in another person.
Yeah, and I think that in her family, her father had very much emphasized the commonality between the Jews and the Native Americans. That's something that she grew up with. And so for her to actually meet a Jewish person was unique, because although she had been in Minneapolis, she just hadn't had that kind of opportunity to meet somebody, and certainly not somebody with the background that I had.
Absolutely.
So for both of us, it was just one of those amazing meetings. It was really like a kismet. And even how I got to her was a very strange thing, because I had called the tribal council, and they didn't want to hear anything from this white lady. They were like, you know, we don't know who you should talk to. But somebody had said, call the school, and maybe the school, because in Grand Portage they have just an Ojibwe school, K through 8, where they speak Ojibwe, they teach Ojibwe culture. At the time that I came to visit, I wanted to come and do a demonstration of woodblock prints for the school, and they did not have time for me because they were fixing their feathers that they use for their rituals. And in the winter is when you fix your feathers and you do the stitching for your tribal outfits. So it was like amazing. Even that was really interesting. And they got me in touch with her because, oh, well, she's the liaison, the cultural liaison. And when she heard that I'm a gardener and she's a gardener, and we had all these things in common, was when she decided that she wanted to speak with me. But it was kind of a one-off. They just happened to connect me with her.
From your spiritual perspective, just a lucky break, or do you see other? Something's going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think you and I are synchronicity too. Yeah. We have so many threads that we make a nice braid together.
Yes.
Well, it will help us a little bit. Some of them are obvious to all of us. What other little threads have you found that?
Well, I mean, one of the things that's interesting to me, because when you think about like a braid, like a sweetgrass braid or something like that, each component is separate, but it comes together to make one kind of healing or statement or something like that. Because when we're speaking about healing plants, I was thinking, that violet is it's a graveyard magic violet, or we use different kinds of plants, sympathetic magic, like we have different ways of understanding these plants, but then it comes together to present like a whole view instead of like us being exactly parallel, like it comes together to present a whole view. So, a holistic view.
Yeah. So that's
So it's more expansive than if you had only one direction that was either folklore or medicinal, but then you have my part of it is spiritual, magical, of the ether. So it's different realms that all come together for healing.
okay.
So I don't know if I can use you or not. But
I could listen to it forever. It's fascinating to me. And what fascinates me too is in looking at your work is, I just love getting a little taste of being inside somebody else's whole organization of the world, how you see the world. And I find in art of all kinds, but certainly the art represented here today,
Yes.
the glimpse into another world is a treasure.
Yeah, and it's interesting that we have, your vision is more, it's representational, but it's also like deeply narrative and story based, and my way is very much about kind of rhythm and movement and shape and color, but still derived from plants. So.
All right, I love this, but I will open it up. Are there questions? I'll give it up, I'll give up. Are there questions that you would like to ask here?
So thank you so much, all of both three of you. This has been just so enlightening. And I'm curious, were you as human beings, and also obviously as distinguished, accomplished artists, were you seeking healing? And is that what draw you to this type of work? Or did you were fascinated with the natural world and plants, and then through that kind of adventure, recognize the spiritual, connective, healing, loving perspective that you're bringing to us today?
I would say that I grew up, my grandfather grew up in our home, and he was born in 1890, so he was a very elderly man that lived with us who had various illnesses. My father had several heart attacks before he was 40. My mother had her health issues. So early on, I gravitated towards huge volumes of herbals to try to see if I could help each of them. So that's my answer to your question. Helping
that makes
others.
sense.
I think that for me, it comes from the back door. I think that being a gardener and being involved with nature, and I'm a huge hiker. I love hiking. I love being in nature in general. Just the forms and the shapes of nature started to go back to, these probably have healing capacities. I know this is a healing capacity, and kind of going to it in that direction. I wasn't seeking for my own healing, but kind of that, I love the commonality that plants bring to humanity. I love the connection, that connection.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
As a non-artist, I'm talking to both you guys right now. How do you know when the piece is done? No more. How do you know? How do you know? That's a really good question. How do you know that's no more realism? I really have no idea how you figure that out.
For me, I mean, the question is even also, which way is up? So I spend a lot of time, I have a really big comfy chair that I sit in the studio, and I just look and see, it will tell me when it's done.
So it comes from here,
Yeah.
that's how you know?
Yes.
Yeah, just tells you,
Really?
it will tell you. It will
Like,
say,
don't do it anymore, you might mess
just,
it
you
up.
better stop now.
Yeah.
See, the thing is that it's a little different than Stephanie's methodology because with me, I'm cutting wood. Oftentimes, first of all, I'm cutting. So the image that I'm cutting it is so skewed. And so the best thing is to cut less than cut more. And that never happens because your hand just keeps wanting to do more and more and more. And so it's so difficult to restrain yourself and just, and just kind of go, stop! And you better pull a print now because otherwise you're going to lose some things that you have right now. But oftentimes, you pull that first print and it's a disaster because it's so noisy, there's so much background, and so it's a really long process to get it to that stop point. Does that answer the question?
That was good.
Gabriella, you had told me earlier that you do sketches, that you work up to each of these. And Stephanie, I'm curious if you have if each of you could kind of describe your process. Because with Gabriella, it sounds like you're thinking about this before you finally start cutting wood. Whereas Stephanie, I'm not sure if what we're seeing here was the work or if there were other things that went into it.
Well,
maybe on paper.
resonating, the two questions build upon each other. I mean, I was thinking as we were speaking that there are so many what are in my view failures to represent like each of these pieces. There's probably, each of them probably has 10 others that were trashed because I'm very discerning about what is representing my vision properly or not. So I do a lot of preliminary work too. I do a lot of work in black and white before I get to the color. So, and then there's just lots of thought process, thinking, like I said, in my chair and in my dreams, and the work process, even when I'm out of the studio, it continues. So.
That makes sense because these look so finished that if you just came up with that, boom.
And it's funny because, some of them, like I have this one piece called Ellsworth Kelly Orchid that a hotel chain, just like they keep buying and buying more and more prints of this one tiny little piece. But and I probably physically did that piece in about an hour or less. But so much other work went into the development of that one piece, so that's my process.
Thank you.
People always ask me, well, how long did it take you to come up with that?
Yeah.
It's like, well, 57 years.
Yes.
And how long did it take? So my process is really different, and I cannot say enough about how in awe I am of a person that can listen to music and react to it and come up with this incredible work that you come up with. Because I do listen to music also, and I listen to books on tape, but it's really to kind of I do, for each print, I probably do 10 or 12 sketches in order to get it just so that by the time that I get to the wood, it needs to be exactly where it is, because it's not like you can erase it. You know, once it's cut, it's cut. I go through so many iterations, and then you cut it, and guess what? Surprise, it looks completely different than what you drew, because you drew with a pencil, and now you're cutting from wood, and you're using knives. And so the process, the process changes the concepts throughout the system. And of course, once you ink it also, it changes it. So it's always a little bit of a surprise. And I have to say, and I don't know if you feel this way as well, but walking into each room and seeing them hanging and talking to each other like this is such a surprise.
Yeah.
Because, wow.
It's so wonderful.
I didn't even doing that in a way. It's just kind of, they look so different when they're hanging, because what you're seeing is you're seeing it on the table, and you're seeing that one spot that you thought was so bad.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's just so funny when you see them back then, you're like, I'm pretty good.
Here, here.
This isn't so bad.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, like when you mentioned about music, like if I think of something like Brandenburg concertos, like I think, okay, so God has spoken in this piece of music, and this, if I could emulate or borrow or capture like any little piece of that, then I'm doing pretty well, you know. So I'm looking at my objects on the floor, like I do the aerial perspective, like the Aboriginal people do. But then I'm listening to very talented composers or artists and so forth, and just feel like if I can pull a little bit of that into my work.
Do you have certain music that you use for certain parts of your creative process, where like there's hip hop will maybe be the start, and then you have the concertos for the finish or something like that?
No, there are different days or even different weeks. I feel that the rawness and energy, like I get goosebumps from some older hip hop that I like to utilize that kind of energy and rawness and roughness in my work. But I probably wouldn't typically listen to Bach and let's see, Public Enemy, like on the same day.
Because I think that there's certain parts, like when I'm doing the sketching, or like when before the sketching, when I'm first starting to think about what is this next body of work, because I always work in series. And so, for example, right now I'm working on a series about joy, because I've been dealing with death and dying and things like that for the past couple months. And so the music of what you do when you're first starting with the concepts and those little beginning sketches is very different than the music. I mean, I can't really focus. I can't focus on a story when I'm starting my sketching. I have the stories for later when I'm just kind of printing it up, using my little wood paddle, and then it takes forever to get it off that paper, and that's when that story can come in. But the music is like so nice to have for just giving your, like you said, where it opens up your head and it opens up your mind, and you're in this other kind of place.
Yes, I mean, I feel like it's aspirational too. I mean, even like someone like Joni Mitchell, or, you know, it's just these very gifted people that inspire me. And I'm like, whoa, if I could take some of that and put it on canvas, or it can inform my line quality, then I'm getting somewhere. The bold day, like, you know, the Four Seasons, those kinds of things. So. Any other questions?
And we are getting towards the end. Is there another question here?
I just want to offer a comment, and I'm biased, this is my sister, so, but, to both of you,
Blended.
I I just am so appreciative that modern day people take such care to stop and literally smell the flowers. I mean, you are literally bringing the joy of the most natural and foundational part of our earth to us in such a frenzied world. The thought you put into it, the analysis you give, the sensitivity you have is just so, it is healing in itself, because we are just constantly rushing. And I'm glued to that screen and there's not anything fragrant or healing about it. And it's actually a good, I actually feel like I'm gonna go out and smell our earth a little bit because of your influences, both of you, so thank you.
That's such a nice statement. It's very inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can't think of a better way to close, but go ahead.
I want to, also offer to that, and there is no relationship. But I too want to thank you so very much. We at Brushwood are doing a lot of, a lot of research and also bringing a lot of attention to how the natural world does transform and heal in very deliberate, direct ways, and also very, if you will, maybe indirect ways. And I think that through the art form, whether it be music, whether it be on your canvas, whether it be dance, all of this, along with nature itself, really does reroute the pathways to the brain. And so when you speak about healing, often it's not about curing, so to speak, but it's about bringing such a peace and joy and love to a human being that they can feel, as you so well said, present and that joy around them. So what you're doing is not only so significant to all of us at Brushwood, but to humanity. And I just want to deeply thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Absolutely quite extraordinary.
That was great.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you. Thank you, Barb, too, for moderating this and bringing all the.
It was a joy for me, thank you.
Oh my gosh, I love this series because it really creates this feeling, this energy among a community that I don't typically feel in a lecture scenario. So thank you all for participating in that and contributing to it as well. We will close the discussion for today, but we do hope you'll all fill out a little postcard and share your thoughts with us. If you could write down exactly what you said. We are having our next Dear Earth talk on April 7th. And it's actually kind of along these lines about, so we're hosting an exhibition by Michael Lewis on birds from 7 continents around the world. And we have Dr. Hector Rosgato from Rosalind Franklin University, who's going to be speaking about the impact, the health benefits of music, of bird songs on our brains, on our well-being. So it's interesting that you both made this connection to music at the end of the talk here. Very connected, again, all this energy. So we hope you'll all come to that, and we also, you might have seen a sneak preview of it in the room near the front door, but we're launching an art supply exchange, a Brushwood Art Supply Exchange on March 10th. And we've almost reached 2,000 pounds of donations of art supplies. So we have a lot already, but we're taking in donations right now. And then we're going to be launching this program in early March as a way to offer discounted art supplies or no-cost art supplies to community partners, educators, artists, just a really great way of sharing those resources. So please join us for future programs, and thank you so much all for joining us today.